Okay, welcome everybody. Today is October 28th, 2020, and this is the United Orthodox Synagogue's Lunch and Learn, brought to you via Zoom. So wonderful to see everyone, and looking forward to studying with you this morning, actually this afternoon. We are continuing the Mitzvah Shiur, where each week we do a mitzvah related to the Parsha. Last week we had a challenge because, at least according to the Sefer HaChinuch, there were no mitzvot in last week's Parsha, although we're going to maybe touch on that at the end of this week's class. So we talked about the mitzvah of giving people the benefit of the doubt, because we read the famous discussion about Noach, whether he was righteous or not, and some rabbis viewed him as righteous and some did not view him as righteous. And so we talked about how far one has to go to give someone the benefit of the doubt. Does everyone deserve the benefit of the doubt? Things like that. So just as a reminder, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the raise hand function, which is available to you. You could also send me a question via chat, if that's helpful, or you could try to raise your hand on the screen. I'm not sure I'll see it because I can't see all the screens with while we're sharing the screen, but we'll do the best we can. And if I don't get to you, don't take it personally. Although I would take it personally if you didn't get to me, but that's another story. And we'll do the best we can. Okay, here we go. So today there's one mitzvah, according to the Sefer HaChinuch. There's one mitzvah in Parshat Lech Lecha, which is this week's Torah reading, and that is the mitzvah Brit Milah, circumcision. We're not going to talk so much about the specific details of how a circumcision takes place and the specific rules about what has to actually take place for a circumcision to be quote unquote kosher. We're going to talk about some interesting aspects, some strange ideas or aspects of the mitzvah of Brit Milah and the ceremony that takes place at the Brit Milah itself. So let me just ask I have everyone's screen open. So raise your hand, live and in person, if you've ever been to a Brit Milah, if you've ever been to a circumcision, a Jewish circumcision ceremony. Yes. Okay. I can't see Leora, Steve, Lily, Doreen, Marilyn, Emily, or Hannah, but I'm assuming that many, if not most of you, have in fact been to a Brit. So we are going to discuss some things that you may have noticed at the Brit. Maybe you didn't. Let's look at the source for the Brit Milah first. The source for the Brit Milah, well, that's also an interesting question, but there's the mention of Brit Milah in this week's Parsha. Vayomer Elokim el Avram, v'atat briti tishmor ata v'zarecha acharecha dorotam. God said to Avram, as for you and your offspring to come through the ages shall keep my covenant. This is the covenant, and then you see, Unimaltem et bisar arlatchem v'haya laot brit beini v'nechem. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Uben shmonat yamim imo lachem kol zachar. And throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. So there is the first source in the Torah for the mitzvah of Brit Milah. God's discussion with Abraham that we are going to encounter in this week's Parsha. There is another source in the Torah, by the way, in Vayikra, chapter 12, verse 2, Uvayom hashmini yimol basar arlato, the context of speaking about the rules and regulations of a woman who gives birth. The Torah says, on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Instructions given to the parents, specifically to the father, actually, who's obligated to make sure his son is circumcised. So one question you may ask, and we're going to get to it hopefully a little bit later, is why do we have this mitzvah mentioned twice in the Torah? Right, we have it once mentioned in this week's parsha in Berachot, and again we have it in Vayikra. So we're going to come back to that. And in fact, the Sefer HaChinuch, which is again our main guiding source in our mitzvah class, we usually go with the formulation. We teach the formulation of the Sefer HaChinuch, which is often very, very similar to the Rambam's formulation. The Rambam says, mitzvat Milah, that the second mitzvah in the Torah is the commandment to circumcise. Lech lecha yesh ba mitzvat aseh achat. There is one positive commandment in Lech lecha, in this week's parsha. V'hi mitzvat Milah, and it is the mitzvah of circumcision. And it says, Shenemar, Zot Briti asher tishmu beini v'nechem u'bein zaracha acharecha, himo lachem kol zachar, quoting the verse that we just read in Berachot, v'nichpela b'seder isha ki tazria. And it is repeated in Vayikra, uvayom hashmini yimol b'sar orlato. We just saw those psukim. V'harbe mitzvot nichpelu. Here the Sefer HaChinuch gets into this question of why some things are repeated. He says many mitzvot are repeated in the Torah. B'mkomot harbe b'Torah v'chulan letzorech kemo shepirshum chachameinu zechron lebracha. And he tells us where the Talmud talks about why mitzvot are repeated. Okay, so that's the mitzvah. Okay, so here's a question that I will start with this question. You see, there are two mitzvot, one mitzvah mentioned twice in the Torah, right? If I were to ask you a question now, why are you commanded to perform a Brit Milah on male children? What's the source? What would you say is the source for that mitzvah? I would give you a chumash, and I would say, open up the book and show me the source for that mitzvah. Where would that be?
That Avraham circumcised himself.
Okay, so Shula says it would be in this week's parsha, Parshat Lech Lecha, where God tells Abraham that he has to circumcise every male. And in fact, Abraham's circumcision is recorded. Good. Anyone have a different approach? I know one person who has a different approach. The Rambam. Is he on today's call? The Rambam? I don't think he made it today. The Rambam has a different approach. And he says, and here the Rambam is teaching a very, very important klal, a very important principle of how to understand the Torah. This is what he says. I'll read it to you. It's in Hebrew, and I'll translate as we go. It's found in the Rambam's Perush HaMishnayot. The Rambam wrote many things. One of the things he wrote is a commentary on the Mishnah. And this is a Mishnah in Chulin dealing with the prohibition of eating the Gid Hanashe. Right? That's the sciatic nerve. So let me ask another question. If I were to give you a chumash and ask you to show me the source in the Torah for the prohibition to eat the sciatic nerve, the Gid Hanashe, what might you tell me? Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to, or answer the question in the chat.
It was the Yaakov incident, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the Yaakov incident. Right, the Yaakov incident. Zach, is that what you wanted to say?
I want to say Yaakov, but it's much more. It's practically a sign of certain prevailing Yaakov over his opponent.
Right.
Different sources call this Malach, but this is what I wanted to say.
Okay, great. So again, the Rambam has a different view. So in his Perush HaMishnayot, in his commentary on the Mishnah, in Masechet Chulin, in the 7th chapter, where the Mishnah talks about the mitzvah, the prohibition of eating the Gid Hanashe, he gives us a general rule about how to understand the Torah. So here's what he says. Source number 3. I'll highlight the beginning of it, so everyone could see where I am. Everyone see the yellow highlight there, source number 3? V'sim libcha leklal hagadol hazeh, hamuva b'mishnah zo, v'hu amram misinai ne'esar. Pay attention, says the Rama, to what's taught in this Mishnah when it says, from Sinai, we were forbidden to eat the gid hanasha, the sciatic nerve. V'hu, here's the general principle taught in this Mishnah. He says, you have to know, anything that we are careful about not doing, osim oto hayom, or anything that we are obligated to do, right? Meaning mitzvot lo taseh, negative commandments, and mitzvot aseh, positive commandments. Ein anu osim zot ella mipnei tzivui Hashem al yedei Moshe. These are obligatory only because they were commanded by God through Moshe. Not Abraham and not Yaakov. Meaning at Har Sinai, or during the time that the Torah was being revealed to the Jewish people. V'lo mipnei shehashem tziva bekach leneviim shekidmuhu. And not because God commanded these mitzvot to the prophets that came before Moshe. Dugma lakach, for example, Ein anu ochlim ever min achai lo mipnei shehashem asar al bnei Noach ever min achai ela b'mnei Moshe asar aleinu ever min achai b'ma shenitztava b'Sinai. We do not refrain from eating the limb of a live animal because God told that to Noach and to his descendants. Rather, we are obligated to refrain from that only because God told that to Moshe at Har Sinai. V'chein. Now he gets to our example. Ein anu malin biglal she'Avraham mal et atzmo v'anshei beito. We do not perform circumcision because Abraham circumcised himself and his household. Elovnei she'Hashem tzivanu al yedei Moshe lamul kemo shemal Avraham alav hashalom. But why do we do it? Because God told us at Har Sinai to do a Brit Milah like Avraham did. Like Avraham did, but Avraham's not the source. V'chein gid hanasha. So he finally ends with the example that he started with. And the same goes for the prohibition of eating the sciatic nerve. Ein anu nimshachim bo acharei isur Yaakov Avinu. We do not follow this prohibition because it came from Yaakov, as was mentioned. Ela tzivui Moshe Rabbeinu, but only because it came from Moshe. Halo tireh amram sheish mi'od u'shlosh esrei mitzvot nemru lo leMoshe miSinai. There were 613 mitzvot given to Moshe at Har Sinai. That's a general principle, very interesting, right? That we are not obligated to do mitzvah of circumcision, or avoid eating the gid hanasha, or avoid eating Avram and Achai, a limb from a live animal, because our ancestors in the time of Noach and Avraham and Yaakov did it. Rather, only because it was commanded to Moshe by Hashem at Har Sinai, which raises a very interesting theoretical question that had the mitzvah not been repeated at Har Sinai, we would not be obligated to it. Had God not told us once again at Har Sinai to do mitzvah Milah, from Sinai on, the Rambam seems to be telling us, there's a new reality, a new halachic reality. So that's the first point in terms, I got you, Elisheva. That's the first point in terms of the mitzvah of Milah. Its source is Har Sinai. The model, right? The model is, of course, Avraham. But the reason we're obligated is because of Har Sinai. Okay, Ellie, go ahead, please.
Oh, well, I did not know this, but.
Oh, excellent. My work is done.
I know. I feel very ignorant. Did not know this.
God forbid.
Especially
You know what? I didn't know it either till I learned it.
Well, yes. Well, yes, but
Now-
I've had a lot of conversations with Muslim people in taxis in Australia. So now I've got something to add. But I was just actually that this really does separate out Islam from Judaism, like because that's a lot of the issues is around circumcision and what have you, as I understand it. So that's kind of really given me a lot of.
we both are Abrahamic faiths, but our source of commandment is not Abraham. Our source of commandment, correct, is Hashem at Har Sinai.
Okay, so good. If they ever let me back into Australia, I've got it.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, Zach.
Yeah, I would like to actually appreciate for this statement because it gives absolutely clear division between our historical memory and our historical conscious. Before Mount Sinai, we had tribal conscious. After Mount Sinai, we have national conscious because
Nice.
we were born as a nation.
Right.
I would not afraid to say Jewish civilization was born at Mount Sinai, and legal code or our Torah is absolutely important part of any civilization. And for us, it became the pillar. It's also interesting to say that some populace never shook off tribal conscious. This is why I'm glad that Elisheva mentioned about Islamic people. They still have a very strong tribal connections. We look ourselves as a nation which absolutely different level. Thank you, Rabbi, for this.
Okay, thank you. Great. I'm surprised no one's commented on my beautiful rainbow color scheme here, which I thought was so nice.
They are very nice. Rabbi, can I ask something?
Sure, B'vakasha, Chana.
So before Sinai, Abraham was before Sinai.
Okay.
So he didn't get the command from Moshe. So he
He got it
circumcised.
from God, Hashem.
He got it directly from God. That's why he did it.
That's why he did it. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right, but after Har Sinai, all bets are off. Everything we do now only because it was given for the first time or repeated at Har Sinai. That's the Rambam's view.
So
Yeah.
why
Okay.
did Abraham do it?
God told him to. Right here. God told him to. Why do we do it? Because Hashem also told us to, but only because Hashem told us to at Har Sinai through Moshe. It seems that Moshe is the linchpin here. It's interesting. Let's read the Rambam's language carefully. Ein anu osim zot ela mipnei tzivui Hashem al yedei Moshe. I think the Rambam is trying to distinguish between Moshe and any other one and any other Navi beforehand. Moshe is the key, is the key factor here.
Rabbi,
Yes.
and why is the responsibility is it solely on the father or primarily?
Well, it's on the father until the child becomes an adult, and then it's on the child. And if there's no father, or if the child is negligent, then it sort of reverts to the community at large.
So technically, if there is no father, the mother is not
There's
required.
always a father. I'm yet
Well-
to meet a human being that didn't have a father.
Well, right, but I mean, if if somebody was deceased or
Right, the
something,
father's out of the picture, correct?
right?
Then technically there are all sort of technicalities about who the obligation is, but generally the mother would assume that obligation
Sure. Okay.
and make sure that the circumcision is done. Right. Excellent. Good question. Okay, let's talk. Oh, go ahead, Ellie.
Oh, could we use the same argument to distance ourselves from the sacrifice? That that story, which a lot of people who don't believe in God, they often come at me with that one, like, oh, you believe in a God that would make you do that. You know,
Yeah, that's
at what point are
well,
we
yeah, because we do have later,
ourselves?
we do have later verses that actually forbid child sacrifice.
Yeah,
We have to
so
look at the whole picture, and we have to look at the Avram story. There are different ways we could look at it. There's actually going to be a lecture on it at UOS coming up.
no, but I just meant this gives you, it sort of gives you a way of distancing some of the stuff that went before if we're going to follow this.
Well, you could argue it's not normative, right? I mean, it's still a difficult episode to make sense of, even though, thankfully, it's never been commanded against since then. Yeah, it's never been commanded. Okay. Okay, let's get started on the next question. My next question is the next topic, or sort of in what I'm calling interesting aspects of Brit Milah. So the first one is we've all learned something new about where the commandment comes from. Next, we've been to Brit Milah, and so this should be familiar to us. Let's together learn a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. Tanu Rabbanu. The rabbis taught us. Hamal Omer Asher Kiddishanu Mitzotav V'Tzivanu Al Hamilah. The Moel, right when he's doing the Brit Milah, says Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam Asher Kiddishanu Mitzotav V'Tzivanu Al Hamilah. Okay, that's what it says here. Who has made us holy through his commandment and commanded us concerning circumcision. That sounds like any other mitzvah you make on a bracha. For example, Asher Kiddishanu Mitzotav V'Tzivanu Al Nitilat Lulav. Or Asher Kiddishanu Mitzotav V'Tzivanu Lehadlik Ner Shel Chanukah. Al Leishev Basukah, right? Every mitzvah, almost every mitzvah, has a bracha beforehand. But then the Gemara gives us something very interesting. Aviha ben Omer, after the Moel says the bracha, then the father says a bracha. Asher Kiddishanu Mitzotav V'Tzivanu L'Hachniso B'Brito Shel Avraham Avinu, who has commanded us to bring him into the covenant of Abraham our father. And then all the people who are standing there, you may remember this, say, Kishem Shenechnas LaBrit, Kenikanes LaTorah L'Chupa L'Masim Tov. Just as this child has entered into the covenant, so may he enter into Torah, marriage, and good deeds. Okay? And this is usually where the father makes a corny joke, marriage not so fast, all things like that, right? But my question is, why this second bracha, which is unique? It seems unique. It's not common, right, to have a second bracha on a mitzvah. When I shake the lulav, I only have one mitzvah. When I sit in the sukkah, I only have one mitzvah. When I read the Megillah, I'm not talking about shechianu and she'asanisim. That's for some. Those are different things. There's one mitzvah there's one bracha on the mitzvah. Here, there seems to be two brachot on the mitzvah. And I'm wondering why that is. It's one mitzvah, the mitzvah of Brit Milah. And so, why do you think we have two brachot here? This is a question that has been discussed since the time of the Rishonim, maybe even earlier, since the Middle Ages. Okay, Nitza.
I think here two things. One is that actually the father is supposed to perform the milah on the son. And the moel is like the shaliach of the father. Secondly, it looks like in our tradition, minhag could become later on as a din or a mitzvah. Like Abraham started the minhag. But after him, it became mitzvah in Mount Sinai. Okay, so the repetition here is to preserve the idea that actually the father is supposed to do the milah on the son.
Okay, very interesting, Nitza. There's a really interesting discussion about what happens if the father's not there. Who says this second bracha? Lachnisa v'rutash l'Avram Avinu. So let's touch about what you said. The first thing you said is that we want to give the father a chance to do something, because it's really his mitzvah, and so we have this additional bracha. That's very, 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 really great suggestion, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. So hold on to that thought. The second suggestion that you mentioned, the issue here is that both brachot are mentioned in the Talmud, both as not being minhag, but both as being obligatory. So this is the early source for this bracha for both brachot. But the first thing you said really strikes a chord, and we're going to get back to that. Okay, excellent. Was there another hand up I thought? Why we have? Yeah, okay, Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, what I would like to say that Torah gives us a few examples when the same word repeated twice. And our sages were explaining that when Hashem wanted to make accent on something, he repeats this word twice. Very few places in the whole
Right.
Torah. I think that we have exactly the same representation, because through whole our history, such metaphysical meaning as Brit Milah really was difficult to implement. And I know through our recent history, especially from World War II the cases, when people in an enormously difficult situation, when they could not perform any mitzvah, they were forcing for this one. My own aunt, who were escaping from Moldova on a train when she was pregnant, and when she reached eastern portion of Soviet Union, she went to labor, and she insisted on unknown place really to get out, and she found a military hospital, and she found Jewish surgeon, and she begged him because he was a communist, and he could not do it. Otherwise, he would have. He secretly performed Brit Milah on her child.
Wow.
And for her, it was only thing. You can imagine situation. It was 1941, June, after Germany attacked Soviet Union, and so many things were in disarray. And
Do you think the reason is because to emphasize the importance of the mitzvah?
exactly, and it's really embedded in the Jewish psyche.
Okay. Thank you. That's a powerful answer and a powerful story. Thank you, Zach. Okay, we'll take one more comment from Nitza, then we're going to see an authority a little older than everybody else here, the Tosfot.
I think it's interesting from the point of view of a doctor who performs it, that if you do circumcision, you get paid. But if you do a ritual milah, you don't get paid. It's an obligation to do it.
Right? A Moel, right, does not,
That's
usually
a
they don't
different
charge a
thing.
fee, you just give them something on
It's
your
so
own.
important. It's much more than money. It's a mitzvah.
Right, okay. All right, great, excellent. Let's look at the Tosfot here. A couple of answers. The Tosfot is talking about a technical question about when to say the various brachot, before the circumcision, after the circumcision. But in the context of that discussion, he addresses our question. He says here, Avi haben omer lahachniso, the father of the baby says this second bracha. And what is this bracha? Mishabeach, here, I'll highlight it here. Mishabeach umodeh lahakadosh baruch hu shetzivanu al hamilah kishetavo liyado. Interesting. he says, maybe this isn't a classic mitzvah bracha. It's not a classic bracha that you say in the mitzvah. It's more of a thanksgiving bracha. And this goes along the lines of what Zach was saying. We're grateful for this mitzvah. So grateful that we're going to risk our lives to do it. Right? Mishabeach, shevach. We give praise, umodeh, and we thank God for giving us this mitzvah when it comes to us. V'tiknu akan, and it was established here, ligalot ulohodia shezo hamilah naaseh l'shem yotzreinu. And it was we do this. This is so interesting. If you look at, let's look at the language of the bracha, who has commanded us to bring him into the covenant of Avraham our father. How come it didn't simply say who has commanded us to bring him into the covenant? Why do I need to add of Avraham our father? And I think that's something that Tosfos is addressing. We do the bracha right at that moment in order to declare that this Brit Milah, Naaseh L'Shem Yotzreinu, is being done for the sake of God, V'lo L'Shem Avodat Gilulim, not for idolatry, V'lo L'Shem Murna, and not in order to do some incantation to heal the baby, V'lo L'Shem Har Grizim, or not for Har Grizim, the Mount Grizim, which was also a subject, a target, if you will, of Avodah Zarah. We're doing this just for God. So the Tosfot gives us two really interesting things to think about. He's saying this is out of the ordinary. We don't normally have two mitzvot, two brachot. But here, Milah, we're so happy to have the mitzvah of Milah, to declare that we are now becoming part of the Brit of the covenant. We have this bracha of shevach and hoda'ah, of thanksgiving and praise, to make, in a way that makes it clear that this is the covenant of Avraham Avinu. We are entering the covenant of Avraham, not any other covenant. And we're not doing this because of any other reason. We're only doing this for Avraham Avinu. That's why we have the bracha, and that's why specifically it says into the covenant of our father Avraham, and not just our father, or just not into the covenant, excuse me. So that's the Tosfot's suggestion, that the mitzvah of Milah is one mitzvah, and this bracha is a bracha of thanksgiving. Okay. I'd like to share another answer with you from a wonderful book I came across doing research for this class called Siach Erev. Siach Erev was written by Rabbi Chaim Shneir Kotler. I'll just open up his Wikipedia page. Chaim Shneir Kotler was the son of the famous, who was his father? Aaron Kotler, who was the founding rabbi of Beit Midrash Gavoa in Lakewood. If you ever heard of the famous yeshiva in Lakewood, so the yeshiva in Lakewood was founded by Rabbi Aaron Kotler, and his son Shneir Kotler, Chaim Shneir Kotler, took over for him, and he wrote this book called Sichat Erev. Okay, now let me get it back here. Okay, everyone see the screen again of the sources? Is it back? Yes, Ellie, can you see the source here? Okay, great. So he says as follows. He's trying to explain another debate between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam and the Ravid was someone who often disagreed with the Rambam. He says as follows, Dihine b'mila ika bet inyanim. He says every time there's a Brit Milah, there are really two things going on. That's why there are two brachot. What are the two things? Ha'echatu ma'aseh hamilah atzmo she'adam mahul v'lo arel kechol hagoyim. The first is the physical removal of the foreskin, right? Hamilah atzmo, the physical act, the act of the circumcision itself, that the person be circumcised. That is what we would call the ma'aseh ha-mitzvah, the action of the mitzvah. However, he adds this, v'hashenihu lichrot brit im HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The second is to establish a covenant with God. Two things happen at a Brit Milah. One is physical and one is spiritual. The physical thing is that the circumcision takes place. The spiritual thing that happens is that the child is now ushered into the covenant, the Brit of Avraham Avinu, or the Brit with God. And he says, in fact, if you look at the psukim, the verses themselves bear out that there are two things going on. Let's look at the psukim. Here they are. One is himo lachem kol zachar. Every male among you shall be circumcised. That is the ma'aseh ha-mitzvah, the technical requirement of the physical requirement. What's the spiritual fulfillment? V'haya le'ot brit, there it is, brit beini uveinechem, that it will be a symbol of the covenant between me and you, meaning us and God. So that's why there are two brachot. Now let's go back and look at the brachot. It's beautiful. The first bracha is what? Al ha-milah. Asher kiddushem sabatzivanu al ha-milah. That's about the physical circumcision. Right? The physical circumcision. The second is lahachniso bivrito shel Avraham Avinu, to usher the child into the covenant of Avraham. So you need two brachot, because there are really two mitzvot that are going on that time. Now, one happens automatically. As soon as the child has the physical circumcision, it's an automatic that the baby is now ushered into the covenant. But two things are happening. And since two things are happening, two brachot are necessary. And I thought that was really beautiful. And Ellie, I had never heard that before until this week. So we're both in the same boat now, right? I had never thought about that idea. Such a beautiful idea that we all think that the child is becoming part of the covenant, but we don't think about it as sort of this independent idea worthy, right? Worthy of its own bracha. And that's what Rabbi Shneur Kotler tells us in his Sefer Siach Erev. Okay. That, I want to share one other approach about that. So we've seen two really nice answers about why we have two brachot. One is it's almost like it's not a mitzvah bracha, it's more of a bracha of shevach and hoda'ah, praise and thanksgiving, and we're so overjoyed to have this mitzvah, and we are saying this bracha to prove that we are doing this mitzvah for the sake of our covenant with God. One mitzvah, but the second bracha expresses joy and happiness. The second approach, really two things are happening at the bris. One is the physical ma'aseh, the physical act, and the second is the spiritual act as the child is ushered into the Brit. Therefore, two brachot. One other approach. This is from a sefer called Psakim Utshuvot, which is a book that surveys the Shulchan Aruch, goes through the Shulchan Aruch, and provides sometimes updates in terms of what contemporary, more modern poskim have said about situations that have arisen which are not covered by the Shulchan Aruch due to modernity and unique situations. And sometimes it also offers just general insights into the sections of the Shulchan Aruch it's talking about. And that's what we have here. Birkat l'hachniso, also wondering why we have these two brachot. Right here, letter Gimel. V'yavi ben mivarech ben chatichat ha'or la'lepriya asher kiddushem v'tzivanu l'achniso b'vrito shel Avraham Avinu. After the actual first cut, but while the Moel is finishing off another aspect of the mitzvah, the father says the second bracha. V'hatam shetiknu shtei brachot la mitzvah zu. Our question, the reason why two mitzvot were established for this mitzvah, Katav HaBeit Yosef, he quotes Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote a commentary on an early code called the Tur, and then wrote his own code, more than one. The one we're most familiar with is the Shulchan Aruch. He writes, the Kevan, and this is Nitza, listen to this. The Kevan shehamohel shayach b'mitzvat Milah, gam below av, since the Moel who does the Brit is connected to this mitzvah, even if there would be no father there. Why? Because, like I said, if there's no father, then the obligation falls on the Jewish community. And so the Moel, even if there would be no father there, would sort of be the representative of the Jewish community, and therefore has a shayachut, a connection to, a relationship to the Milah, even though he's not the kid's father. Lachein tiknu le'av haben bracha acheret. The rabbis established, so Baruch Shekivant Nitza, the rabbis established a second bracha just for the father. This is a bracha which is not shayach to the moel. This has nothing to do with the moel. This is the father's obligation only. Now the question is, of course, technically speaking, what if the father's not there? Do we leave out that bracha? Do we not leave out? Do we not say that bracha? In the end, we say that bracha even though the father's not there. But according to the Beit Yosef, the original reason it was established was because of what Nitza said. Since anyone could do the Milah, assuming you're trained, but by anyone I mean as a representative of the Jewish people who are obligated to take responsibility for it. We want something unique and special for the father, and therefore he says, a third very interesting answer to why we have two brachot. Shula.
Actually, it was Obeth. Could it be
Hold
a
on
woman?
a second. Obeth, Shula also has her hand up. Just 1 second. I'll get you next. No worries. Shula, just unmute yourself. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
We assume that we have a mohel because we can't ask the father to do that because it's too emotional. It's his son, and he just cannot bring himself into cause pain to his son. So we have a mohel. So he has a bracha, and then the father has a bracha. Now, suppose the father is a doctor, and he's and he also doing the Milah. So, is he obligated also to say the two brachot if he's the mohel and
Yes.
to have the
Correct.
Brit?
Both. He would
So-
take both. Absolutely.
So is he allowed to, he has to say the two brachot?
Yes, he would say both brachot. Correct.
Is that permissible for the father to do the Brit?
Sure, it's the father's obligation to do the brit.
That's what I said. So it doesn't be, and yet he has to say the two brachot. Okay.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. Okay, Obeth.
If there wasn't anyone else available, could a woman do it?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes. The short answer is yes. It's uncommon in the, I guess, Orthodox world, but the answer is yes.
There's biblical precedent for it, right?
Yes, there is. What would that be?
Oh, yeah.
Sipporah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Although we just learned at the beginning that biblical precedent does not necessarily mean commandment, but in this case, there is such a possibility is available in halacha. Yes. Okay.
Where do you see this possibility in the halacha that a woman can do it?
Where do I see it? I mean, it's mentioned in the halachic sources. We could talk about that in next year. That's a great topic for next year, by the way. So someone remind me next year on Simchas Torah, when we're getting close to Parshat Noach again, that we should talk about Mohelet. It's a good topic, but it is mentioned in the halachic sources. I think I once was asked that by the Jewish Herald Voice in an interview. Okay, my friends, so that is it for today. We talked about two major things. One is the source for the mitzvah of Milah, which according to the Rambam we saw, and every mitzvah is really only Har Sinai, which led to all sorts of wonderful comments by you guys. And then the second thing is why we have these two brachot. And we saw three beautiful answers. One answer was because we want to express thanksgiving and highlight the fact that we're doing this for the Vrito shel Avraham Avinu, and specifically for the Brit of Avraham Avinu, and not for any other reason. The second was because there are really two things going on. One is one is the actual removal of the foreskin, and the second is the entry into the Brit. And third as Rabbi Nitza Hempel noted, that we do this because we want the father to have a clear and unambiguous way to participate in the mitzvah that technically should not be done by anybody else. Because since anyone can do the bracha al hamila, whoever the moel is, there's something separate. Chazal added something specific for the father. Okay, everyone, wonderful class. Great comments by everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's always great to see you and study with you. Hope to see you soon. And until then, I wish you all the very, very best. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, Rabbi Gelman.
Yeah.
My sister Hannah wanted me to tell you that she loves your rainbow text color.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Is she on this class?
I'm not sure. I just showed her a picture of it because she loves rainbows.
Okay, great. You made my day. Thank you. Okay. Say hi to
You're
Hannah.
welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I want to tell you interesting thing just for 1 second. During Soviet Union, some prominent position Jews, when their baby boys were born, officials were coming to see if children are not circumcised. It's a
Wow.
very interesting, not from Jewish point of view, that how Goyim looked at it as a dual loyalty. The Jews should not do it.
Wow.
It's how important for the communist the power was ensure that boys are not circumcised. I know this from the first hand, and that's why I wanted to share with you, because you talk only about Jewish world and Jewish thoughts, but it's another side.
Yeah.
How the rest of the world look Brit Milah.
Wow, such a different world. That's, those of us, myself, who were born here and grew up here and never had to contend with anything like that. It's important that you share that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to tell you that
Thank you.
it's
That's really an interesting
another side of this
thank you.
important mitzvah.
May I ask a
Thank you, Rabbi.
question?
Sure.
There is a movement in Israel. I'm sorry to say that, but there is a movement